What are some powerful negotiating techniques?
Okay, the tools of negotiators are tactics. And tactics are very interesting because, in essence, we use them all the time. A child uses the tactic of tears. You could use them too, in all fairness. Tears always work because it says to the other person, I am emotionally distraught because I'm not getting what I want. So that's a tactic on the part of a child. Now, on the part of a parent, it would be, I'm not going to talk with you. I'm not even going to entertain your request until you stop crying. That's a counter tactic. So one of the first things we want to remember is there is no tactic without a counter tactic. There is no snake bite without anti-venom. And in the negotiating process, we have to use both sides of these tactics and counter tactics so that we do a very important thing, which is called balance. All negotiations have to work like the scales of justice. Do you remember those? If you put one too many bananas in this side of wax fruit, then this side goes up and this side goes down. When we win negotiate, we want both sides to be equal. So when we use tactics, we use counter tactics to put things back in balance. Now here are, say, 4 extraordinary tactics that you can use all the time. The first is, don't ever go into a negotiation telling the other side that the outcome is entirely up to you, that you're in total control and total power. I call it always having a higher authority. And the reason you want to do that is you can use the higher authority tactic to say to a salesperson, for instance, hey, listen, this is okay with me. I need to go home and check with my spouse. This gives you time if you're not happy with the negotiation so that you can think of new tactics to use to get more of what it is you want. It also keeps you from getting backed into a corner on a deal you may not be happy with. So always say, hey, this sounds good to me. I got to check it out with the boss. Sounds good to me. Have to check it out with my spouse. Sounds good to me. Need to go home and ask the family. So always have a higher authority. Now, the counter tactic to that is interesting, too, because if I were to say to you, hey, listen, I need to go home and check with my wife, you might say to me, I know you do, but here's my question. Are you going to go home and suggest that we do this to your wife, or are you going to go home and say, I'm not there yet, honey, I'm using you as an excuse not to go on? Now, this is a very powerful tactic because it, in essence, gives me my power back. The negotiator is saying, hey, listen, I think you know what you want, and I know you need to check with your spouse, but in the end, I trust that you're going to get your spouse to go along with whatever you want. Is there something else we have to discuss before you go there? So that's the first tactic, is always have a higher authority. The counter tactic is to give them their authority back and make sure that they're really on board with you. The second might be the set-aside. Now, the set-aside's very, very powerful, but the set-aside should be used sparingly because of it. Let's say you're negotiating and you can't come to terms on a price. Let's say you're negotiating for a car and you've determined that you want a red car and it's got to have air conditioning and it's got to have OnStar, or it's got to have some kind of navigation tool, or it's got to have something else in it that you really, really want. And they get to that point where they're talking about price. And you're not there yet, and you say, you know what? Let's set the price aside for now. Can we do that? And let's talk about more of the things that I want on the car. Now, if the salesperson's smart, they'll say, yeah, by all means. Okay, what else did you want? What else is there that we need to get to? Because many times negotiating boils down to clarifying the meaning of the other person. We think we know it, but we don't. So set things aside if they're big and you can't solve them now, and then agree to get back to them at the end. Now, the counter tactic to that would be, you know what, sir? I'd like to sell you a car, and I have the car that seems to meet everything you said you want, but if we don't come up with a price, I can't really start the paperwork. So in other words, do not let them set it aside. Nevertheless, it's powerful when you reach an impasse and you've got more work to do, set it aside for later, and if they say, no, we can't set it aside, then you can use what we call the third tactic, walk-away power. Now, walk-away power is important because in the end, all negotiations don't work. But the fact is that walking away or showing the willingness to do so is a very powerful tactic. Now, the only challenge with this tactic is that the counter tactic is to let you walk. I'll give you an example. I went to buy a car. I had done my research. I knew how much I was willing to pay for it. And I told the person that I was dealing with that this was the price I would pay for the car. Now, they chuckled and said, well, nobody would sell you this car for that amount. And I said, okay, I'm so sorry. Could you do me a favor? Would you make a copy of this particular car's information sheet. And the man said, okay, why am I doing that? And I said, because I want to take this to your competitor tomorrow morning. I'm going to ask them if they will sell me this car for this price. And if they will, I need them to know which car to buy from your dealership so that I can buy it from them. And then I walked out of the building. Now, by the time I got home, my phone was ringing. They let me walk out of the building, but they let me know as soon as I got home that they didn't want me to walk. They said, okay, we'll deal with you. You come back and we'll sell the car for that price. Now, walking away was a very powerful thing to do. But they also let me walk. And if they had never called, they would have either been calling my bluff or I would have had to go to their competitor and ask the same question. Now, that's walk-away power. The final one I want to look at is the one that most people make a mistake on. And that is that I don't want you to ever jump at the first offer. Always make a counteroffer. Let me give you a good example. Let's say somebody's got an ad for some product that you really want to buy. Maybe you're on eBay and you're looking for something specific and you can afford the price, and you jump right in and say, okay, I'll pay full price. So they sell the product to you. The first thing they think as the seller is, oh, I didn't ask enough. And the first thing you think of is, oh, I could have gotten this for less. So the first thing you always want to do is say, I'm interested in your product. I'm not so sure I'm interested in paying that price for it. And if they're smart, they'll say, well, at what price would you buy my product? And you say, well, let's say, for instance, it's a $20 product and you offer them $10. Then you give them room to say, I want to sell it to you, but $10's not reasonable. Could you manage $17? Now, they've made a counteroffer, which is, of course, the counter to never jumping at the first offer is to always make a counteroffer. And you say, you know, I can't pay 17, but I would consider 15. And then it may all wind up in balance where they say, okay, how about 16? We'll split the difference. So these are the tactics you can use. I teach over 100 tactics and counter tactics in the courses that I teach to, say, attorneys and business executives and sales executives. So these are very in-depth, they're very powerful, and you should have a few of them written down and practiced in advance before you go into any negotiation.